So.
We were just noticing up here that everybody's sitting in the back, and we commented, well, it's a Lutheran church. It is a Lutheran church, after all. So tonight we talk about what does it mean to be a Lutheran. And if I'm a Lutheran now, what was I before? Maybe I've always been a Lutheran. But what does that mean? Isn't that the line that Martin Luther kept using over and over in the Catechism? What is it? What does this mean? Yeah, what does this mean? This is most certainly true.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, what does it mean to be a Lutheran? And I thought I'd start off with a little, humor. That's what you're supposed to do to kind of break the ice. And so I Googled Lutheran humor, and I got a 404 error, file not found. But I do know one Lutheran joke. I've used it many times. It's the only one I know, but it's a pretty good one. Lutheran is marooned on a desert island for many years, and rescuers finally come and rescue him on this desert island. And he has 3 structures there, and they asked him, well, what are these? And he said, well, this is my house. I built this to live in here. And this other building is my church. That's where I go to worship. And they said, oh, what's the 3rd building? And he said, well, that's the church I used to go to. You get a laugh on that from a Lutheran congregation. But we've asked 3 really brave and interesting people. We just had a conversation over dinner who are going to just talk about their experiences, because we've discovered that it's very difficult sometimes to say what makes you Lutheran, what doesn't make you Lutheran. But we're going to talk about that. And let me see, here we go. So, Dan Miller, raise your hand, Dan. It's easy to figure out, right? Dan and Alyssa joined Diamond Lake shortly after their youngest, Emmett, was born to participate in the Sunday school program nearly 10 years ago. Dan is a member of the Welcome Home Committee, supporting furniture hauling and delivery to the apartments when new tenants move in. As a profession, he works in water use, conservation, and policy at the Minnesota DNR and enjoys camping, fishing, and hunting with family and friends. Next to Dan is Felicia Schmidt, and Felicia has been a member of Diamond Lake for almost 9 years, still practicing to be a Lutheran, she says, and then asks the question, how do I know when I'm in? Well, you never do. That's what keeps you coming back. But she and her husband Nick live just a few blocks over by Todd Park, north of Todd Park, right? And children, Harper and Indy, and Felicia is active in the church, schools, and the broader community, and is passionate about affordable housing, working with Minnesota Housing on their operations team. She's a gardener, book reader, camper, pickle maker, a people connector, and lover of comfort food, like Schmickel's pickles, right?
Correct.
Good. And Leslie Pitt is right here, a fairly new member of Diamond Lake, just in the past year or so.
Since June.
Since June.
Brand new.
And Leslie was drawn to Diamond Lake by a sense of family and community. She works for Medtronic in global legal and runs a nonprofit called Project Lolo, which provides access to orthopedic devices to kids in developing countries. A published author of Lolo's Superpower, and Leslie is currently writing a 2nd children's book as part of the series. She boats, fishes, and travels the world with her partner, Brett Bresky. Ooh, I'm glad he wasn't.
He's the loud guy.
Yeah, I'm glad he wasn't here. He would have had something to say about that. So thanks so much for joining us this evening. And as we talked over dinner, One of the things we talked about is what can you define about being a Lutheran? And a lot of course, Pastor Andrea did all this last week, right? I mean, she talked about what Lutheran, and we can assume that she knows what she's talking about. And she told better jokes. Well, that's not hard to do. Martin Luther insults. Wow. Yeah. But as we were talking tonight, one of the things that Dan and Felicia both mentioned, which I thought was kind of interesting, was when we talked about what drew you to this church, for example. It was not necessarily our Lutheran sense of doctrine or theology, but what we do as a church. And I think that that's an interesting new way of looking at church, and not as a place for, because you believe in have a certain doctrinal discipline, but rather what you do with your time here. Now, Dan, you grew up Lutheran, right?
Yep.
And went through confirmation.
Yep, confirmation was high school time more,
Yeah.
9th, 10th grade, I think, rather than here, we experienced 7th, 8th grade. But like we were talking, the brain in high school, I don't know if it recalls a lot of what happened during confirmation in high school anymore. Grade.
So you don't really remember what they taught you in confirmation. Don't be ashamed, because I don't. Is anybody?
It's long
good on
gone.
that?
Great, and but the other thing we did. So I was at Our Savior's Lutheran in Hastings. That's where I grew up, in Hastings, ELCA, and we also had our first communion like 10th grade, right? So we didn't have communion early either. So I remember when Alyssa and I were talking about that and happening in elementary, it was just like, what? I mean,
yeah.
we can trust these kids to do this right now or something. I didn't know what to expect, but certainly still learning, like I think Felicia said, about being a Lutheran for sure.
Yeah. Leslie, you grew up Lutheran also, right?
I did. So my dad's side of the family is German. My mom's side of the family is Norwegian. So not being Lutheran was not a choice.
Yeah.
So I grew up kind of going between the Missouri Synod and ELCA, and then as an adult, I intentionally chose to go to ELCA. And, so I've studied religion in college and been exposed to other religions through travel and such. But it's just, I think it is indoctrinated in who I am and how I was raised, very much so.
Now, you mentioned the Missouri Synod there. I was raised in the Missouri Synod. There's another Missouri. Any other Missouri Synod apostates here? That it's kind of a different church than ELCA.
Very rigid, and I think I believe that even to this day, women cannot be ordained pastors.
Right.
In Missouri, is that right?
Right. Yes.
Right, and it's just incredibly rigid.
Yeah, and if you ever go to a Missouri Synod church and they take communion, you will be told very plainly that this is only for confirmed Missouri Synod Lutherans, and if you don't, if you're not, I mean, you just you can't participate in communion. Yeah, right.
So Alyssa and I went to a wedding of a friend at a Missouri Synod church.
Yeah.
And at one point during the service, during the vows, there was a phrase that was uttered, and I elbowed Alyssa gently, like, did you hear what just said? And the word was obey, right? And it was just like, huh? It was like, cool. Did that really just say, these are 20, I mean, I don't know, I don't, it was 20-somethings, right? I mean, at the time, and it was just like, so that was a new experience and for me, but that was my only experience.
That was a new experience for you to obey. Yeah. That's probably true, right? Yeah. Felicia, you weren't raised Lutheran.
Did everyone just gasp?
No. That's okay. But you were raised
Catholic.
Catholic,
Yep,
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about the difference between the styles of the Catholic traditions and the Lutheran traditions. Can you say a little something about that?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it is when Nick and I were looking for a new church too, that we walked in here and my first thought was, it's so easy to be here. Like you don't, the rigidity is much less, and you can come as you are, you can be as you are, and just truly be that way.
Yeah.
And that was just, it was a breath of fresh air. It was, I mean, I could feel my spirit lifting truly. It wasn't burdensome, it was easy, and it felt natural, and that was the first time I'd experienced that maybe ever.
In a church, or maybe ever,
That didn't,
but
yeah, it didn't, Catholicism felt suffocating for me, and this did not, so,
wow.
yeah.
Is that because there were rules and you felt that, Catholicism, the big distinction between Catholicism and Lutheran is that Catholicism was built on a series of works and a series of achieving something. Luther's whole point was, I want a gracious God and I want to achieve the sense of, he believed that God is grace, that we are free. I mean, do you suppose that was maybe behind the atmosphere? Because none of us believe in works, do we?
Perhaps, but I think it goes, for me, it was a lot, like you were just alluding to, of that is part of it, but it's also, for me, more, what are the actions now? How are
Yeah.
we showing up now? And that's what was unpalatable to me with Catholicism, was how they were showing up in the world for other people.
Yeah, interesting. Now, have any of you been in a period of time in your life when you sought other churches or were interested in other churches, or are you always strictly Lutheran? Well,
I can take this
Felicia, you can, yeah, right, you can handle this one.
So yes, when Nick and I were looking for a new church, that was just the first, like, it's not going to be Catholic. I'm open to pretty much anything else. And we had moved to the neighborhood and, just out for a walk, and we're drawn to the beauty, the physical beauty of this church, like many are. And coming in, then there was that pull of tradition that felt really good. So like that comfort, that home, that nostalgia, and yet met us where we were with our values and our place in this world right now. So it was, that felt good. And again, it didn't need to be Lutheran for me.
Right.
But it did for Nick. I'm going to speak for you. I think that felt like he walked in, he was just like, this is great, this is good. And me, I, just like tiptoe in a little bit of like, I need to feel this out because.
Yeah. Leslie, you just joined fairly recently, so what was that experience like? I mean, you knew you wanted to get to a Lutheran church?
Yeah, so I had been at Lake of the Isles Lutheran for about 19 years. I lived in that area and 4 years ago moved down this area. And just really was looking for a place that was home. I mean, that's like, yeah, just maybe a little less rigid in terms of being expected to show up every Sunday, being expected to put on the good face, where I saw that change at that particular church. And so as I was visiting different churches in the neighborhood and visited maybe about 4 or 5 in the first couple of years, then Brett and I came here last Easter for the first time and just literally walked in and I got the goosebumps and I'm like, but it was just because, and I think there was the interim pastor at that time.
Right.
Yeah, but it was just that sense of home, that sense of community that was based in Lutheranism, based in tradition, but not so much that it was, that I felt obligated.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, it was very welcoming, and it was just, when we decided to join, we both were at this stage of our life. I recently had lost my dad, and as just in this phase of life, it was very important for me to find a home and to sort of be here and,
Yeah.
to go through, what the rest of life will inevitably bring. And it was that sense of just feeling like I was home, and it was almost instantaneous.
Yeah. Huh.
So it was like Felicia said, it was like really that palpable, like calming sense and just knowing.
Now, Dan, you and Alyssa came and you had a family connection.
Yep, right. So Alyssa's aunt and uncle, Bob and Kathy Gustafson, right? Bob's been here for as long as he can remember, and Kathy with him as well. So that was our connection. We knew that they were members here as well. Alyssa's mom and dad were married here in 1976. Anyway, 70s, right? The fun 70s time. And so we did have a connection, right? And initially, you know, both Lutheran. Alyssa grew up Lutheran in Prior Lake, at a small Lutheran that has gotten enormous. And so we had probably visited a few different Lutheran churches in South Minneapolis, you know, maybe when Eloise was born, to try to find a church home. We had been here a few different times, and you know, it just felt right, I think. The connection obviously certainly helped, I think, but you know, it just was a good vibe for us, and you know, we liked the smallness and intimateness kind of
Yeah.
the church a little bit, but yet, you know, enough people to create kind of this sense of belonging and togetherness too.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question, and then you don't have to answer it now, but you can just think about it. What does Lutheranism stand for in your mind? What does it mean to be a Lutheran? If somebody asked you, why do you go to that church? What would you say? So keep that in the back of your mind. First, I'll ask an easy question, and that is, what great Lutheran traditions do we have? Tougher question than I thought.
I mean, the one that comes to mind that we were talking about is Christmas Eve service and the candlelight service, and you know, singing all the Christmas hymns, you know,
Yeah.
with the candlelights, and I mean, I remember like Silent Night sung in German, you know, and just
Right.
I think that whole, but I don't know if that's like a Lutheran tradition per
Yeah.
se, right?
Is it a Lutheran tradition? Anybody? It is
Yeah.
here.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's a good point. That's what I mean. I'm so Lutheran, I guess. I don't know anything else, so I feel I'm kind of naive. I'm kind of closed-minded. Bells, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how
Yeah.
awesome are handbells? Both the kids and the adult bells.
Right.
The choir's, you know, phenomenal. I think like obviously the Christmas services are great.
Yeah.
So
Felicia,
I don't know.
Yeah. Felicia, you said something that I found really interesting about what do you miss from Catholicism?
The incense. I do. Just that smell was just really, it was a powerful smell, and we don't have that here, and I
Yeah.
miss it.
Yeah, yeah.
But then I was able to. There isn't a lot else that I miss, and in part because the traditions that I held closely actually carried through. I mean, just the umbrella of Christianity helped kind of smooth that transition. So
Yeah.
still get to carry a lot of those good traditions with me.
Yeah. Is the smorgasbord a particularly Lutheran tradition? No, yes? The smell of this,
What about the coffee?
yeah.
Lutheran church coffee?
Music is a Lutheran tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This is the question for the assembly, and that is, when you think of Luther and you think of what Luther's new interpretation or his new message was, what phrases or words come to mind? Well, I mentioned grace, yeah? What else? There's one that starts with, what's that? Justified by faith. Now, there's an old Lutheran pastor there who knows her stuff. What else? There's one that I'm really looking for. I'm not going to guess that. Okay.
I was going to say easy. The reason I say easy is it's easy for people that are different to come to our service and participate. But when I go to a Catholic funeral or something, they have all these things they do that I don't know what's going on. So I think we're easy.
Huh.
It's 1-8 to 1. I think that's what, as I see it, I don't understand sense because I can't.
Yeah.
This is Brett, by the way. I told you he was the loud guy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, very Catholic as well. But I agree 100% with you.
Yeah.
Is the way she and I walked into this place on Easter, and I said, and I am a person who runs from church because of the way they format it and their directives.
In the Catholic,
Yeah.
Catholic Church.
And I think that,
Obeys, no, nothing, no. I think as a community, as couples, as family, I think it's so much different. And I think this is the way people want
Yeah.
their lives to be.
Yeah.
It's easy.
Yeah. Felicia, you're.
I think that also that ease translates to inclusivity, which was extremely important to us too, that if you can come and participate in the service with having no experience, how welcoming is that?
Yeah.
And I remember in one of our first visits being drawn to the little cards in the back of the pews that talk about how you can be welcomed here with your children. I
Yeah.
actually feel a little choked up about this because in the church I grew up, there was a soundproof cry room.
Yeah.
Go there.
Wow.
I mean, how does that
Yeah.
make you feel? It sounds so absurd now, but kids are not only welcome here, but we've got a playground. Is that how we're
Yeah.
saying?
Right. Right. A
Yeah,
playground.
right up
Right.
front.
So
Yeah.
that's really different, and that welcomeness people can feel immediately with those small gestures.
Right.
How
Stephanie.
lovely.
So back to your question about Martin Luther, and I don't think this is probably what you're asking for either, but when I think of Martin Luther and what he did, you know, back in his time, was really to take out the middleman.
Yeah.
between us and God.
Right.
And like, people can read and interpret the Bible for themselves. People can have prayer time, communication with God themselves, that it doesn't all have to filter through just certain
Right.
right.
That's. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, you're actually right on what I'm thinking of. There's a phrase for it, but you've just expressed it very beautifully, and that is that we all can communicate directly with God, and we don't have to have go through the priest. There is a priesthood of all believers, the priesthood of all believers. The priesthood of all believers.
Participant interaction.
And the reason I bring that up is the reason I bring up the priesthood of all believers is that it gets to a lot of this easiness or this kind of inclusivity, this sense that all are welcome and that everyone has a chance to be here, to worship, to do what they want to do. And that's a very Lutheran idea. I mean, when we talk about what does it mean to be a Lutheran, the priesthood of all believers is a really important, doctrine by Luther. And it led to a great social change in Europe because there's this massive sense now that the middle class, the serfs, anybody has access to God. And that was really revolutionary in its time. And I think that maybe unconsciously is sort of what we find now is really appealing, is that everybody feels like we're in this together. So, did we come up with any Lutheran traditions other than Christmas Eve service and the smorgasbord?
I guess one that landed on my list too was a mealtime prayer.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe that's not just Lutheran, because we did that Catholic too, but I like our prayer better. My nephew used to call them the magic words. Can we say the magic words before we eat?
Yeah.
Question over here.
Oh, question?
Is it liturgy, Lutheran?
Yeah, liturgy.
Because I grew up in the Methodist church,
Oh my gosh.
and I became a Lutheran, but my grandmother was a Lutheran, so when I was a kid, I would go occasionally to my grandmother's church and be like, they sing everything here.
Yeah.
They sing everything. We speak things, they just sing them.
Right.
I mean, my
Well, that's interesting. Here's another Methodist here who has now been Lutheran longer than a Methodist. Yeah. What's different between the two?
It is a little more liturgical, and it is a little more, I would say Methodist Church, at least in this part of the country, is a little more loosey-goosey, and it really is. And then when you come to the Lutheran Church, you do feel a little more structure, but I find it very comforting, the structure, and the liturgy is very beautiful. I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah, okay.
I don't have any profound words to say. It's when we got married and I said I was going to become a Lutheran, my mom said, "Well, it's pretty much the same thing." So it's like it was okay. It was okay.
Thanks, Mom. Well, that's an interesting perspective because I think we've talked a lot about Catholicism so far, and Catholicism has kind of been the rigid bully that we talked about. And now when you go to Methodism, Lutheran looks structured. So there's all these different gradations, but you did say, yeah, right, I know. You'd never become a Missouri Synod. But liturgy and music are really essential parts that we kind of almost take for granted, that we assume that they're going to be there all the time. And a liturgical church is different from a lot of the Protestant tradition. I want to ask you to think of a few words you might use in an advertising campaign to promote the Lutheran brand. If you were sat down in an advertising agency and they said, we're now representing the Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA, any little memes pop to mind? Ask Christine Spanier, yeah.
I mean, we're
Yeah. Brian worked on a campaign for the ELCA, okay. Hey, God's grace will set you free. It's a good one. Yeah.
I mean, I think we're kind of close with our, 3-word kind of brand that we use now, right? And the serving I talked about earlier,
Right.
about the serving portion of that is really what I can connect to, really resonates with me and I think our family. So, I mean, as far as branding, if you really want to talk about branding, I mean, we're trying to do it. Right?
Yeah. If you move to a different part of the country, would it be important to you to find a Lutheran church, or would you just kind of say, well, kind of do what we did, and that was I'm going to go to the first church that's closest to my house, and if that works, that's good. Otherwise, I'll go another block over. Is there something specific about wanting to go to a Lutheran church?
Well, I'm going to add the marketing meme first.
Oh, yeah.
And I would say, come as you are and stay as you will. Just, right?
Very
Kinda
nice.
takes people, yeah.
Write that down, somebody.
Copyright that, no.
Yeah.
To answer your question about moving away and finding, I definitely, I've lived other parts of the country and absolutely have always sought out a Lutheran church.
Yeah.
Kind of with a Minnesota feel, but you don't necessarily get that in other places.
It's interesting because I've lived in other parts of the country, and you go from here where you're a Lutheran, and it is so sort of in the back of your head that you often don't even think about it. You go to other parts of the country, and you realize, wow, not everybody is a Lutheran. How did that happen?
Right.
How did that? Yeah, and it's an interesting experience, is it not?
Very much so, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Felicia, you have 2 little kids. What's important about them being Lutherans?
I think the God's work, our hands element is the thing that connects them the most to this religion and this church. I think, as Dan was saying too, the learn, follow, and serve, that we exemplify that and we do that, and we're interested in being neighborly to everyone. I'm focusing internally, of course, and supporting each other, but also an external focus, and I want them to see that and feel that too.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so this is a question for the audience. How many sacraments are there in the Lutheran Church? Two? Two? Can you name them? Baptism and communion. How many sacraments are there in the Catholic Church? Wow,
7?
7. Do you know? Can you name it? No.
Beautiful answer.
That was a nice setup. I appreciate that. Felicia, what are the 7 sacraments of the Catholic
boy.
Church?
Baptism, communion, confirmation, marriage. I was going to say,
Final unction, final rites.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, apostles.
final rites, yep. And I'm
We
not,
need 2 more.
What about, like,
No, I think there's 7. There's 7. Yeah, there are
that's a huge
7.
part of it, but I don't know if it's
Ordinate.
ordination.
Yeah.
Confession, that's it.
Confession.
There you go. Now we got them all.
Okay, can we put them in order now? No. Baptism, communion, confirmation,
first, yeah.
marriage, confession, ordination, was it?
Yeah, so actually confession comes like 4th grade. You're very young. And you sit in a dark room with a priest, and it is terrifying.
Wow.
Intimidating, I should say. Somebody back there said-
Ordination. Well, the priest.
oh, yeah.
Well, that's, I'm not Catholic, so. All right, hold on.
But I mean, they're just
Quiet
like,
down.
think of the complexity that goes into that, and the amount of like energy that it takes to just stay abreast of even those sort of things. And I don't know, it's a lot. It's just a lot.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get into a Catholic bashing thing. I'm more about, why are we Lutheran? Why do we, appreciate this? I find it interesting, though, that people who have had a conversion experience or kind of, not a conversion experience like walking down front at a Billy Graham joint, altar call, right. But the sense that I've joined the Lutheran Church, what is that? Is this a profound experience? Is this a sense of I've changed, or have I not changed, or am I more of myself? Am I less of myself than what I've been? Felicia, you mentioned that it's a profound experience, but it's not like a light bulb moment.
Yeah, it was a slow profoundness, or like in hindsight kind of thing that, when it first came here, the familiarity was comforting. It was nice. There is a lot of similarity to other Christian Sunday mornings, and that was lovely. And so then it did feel like an ordinary Sunday, as you phrased it,
Yeah.
until I looked around and saw all the shorts. I'm not used to that. It was-
When I grew up in a very Lutheran town, we were told never to date Catholic because they might end up marrying them.
Right.
Children have to go to the Catholic church. So when you, where's Nick? Oh, it was Nick.
Tending to the children.
He raised Lutheran.
He was.
So what did your family think when you left the Catholic church to become a Lutheran? Was that a betrayal? Was that
I'm going to suspect that my grandparents probably struggled with a little bit. My folks probably did on the inside, but were very supportive because they were able to find that ground of this is their life and this is their happy place. We're just going to stand by and support. Ironically, most of the women in Nick's family are recovering Catholics. It's true. It's sort of a running joke of all the in-laws are. So, but back to your other question, the profoundness of it, but over the years, it's sort of settled in me and kind of looking back that there are some profound differences. And again, it's the welcoming atmosphere, the come as you are, and like mean it, and not, some are welcome if you fit in the right categories, but truly all can be here and find a space in here. And the fact that we can have women pastors and people who are LGBTQIA+, I mean, those are profound things, and equally profound is that a lot of religions don't allow those, and that is just sort of mind-blowing. And again, like bringing my children back into this, that's where we want and need to be raising them in the way that we value.
Yeah, again, we go back to that kind of sense of what do we stand for, what do we believe, but also more importantly, what do we do? Is more significant. Harper, were you going to say something? No. Okay. All right. All right. Any questions anybody has out there? Your comments? Yeah. Russ?
So the megachurches, the praise churches, et cetera, obviously have something going that attracts people. Did you think about that at all as an alternative?
Anybody have an idea of going to a megachurch?
No, I mean, like I said, Alyssa's former church where she attended growing up in Prior Lake has transformed, right, to one of those mega campuses. And it's, I don't know, it's off-putting. I don't know. It's just not our vibe. I mean, I understand, right? It's a different situation, right? So for us, it's just not been on the table for us. I think there's just some really value in that closeness and intimacy and knowing
Alyssa,
people.
this was your church?
Yeah.
Growing up?
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you gone there after it's... Yeah. Yeah. Is it a different kind of service?
I think it depends on, there are various services you can choose from.
Yeah.
And I think the reason my parents still go is there is still some traditional ones. But my parents went church shopping for a while for that reason, because it became a little overwhelming how big it's gone. But they still have some good friends there and are able to find the service that sort of fits them out of the few that they offer. So, yeah.
They were the Lutheran who built 2 churches, and the other one is the one that he used to go to. Yeah, right. No.
I was just going to say, I find those churches to be quite off-putting when you think about the mega churches and like the Jim and Tammy Faye Bakers of the world and the Joel Osteens. And how can these churches be multi-million-dollar businesses? And, it just, I don't know what the appeal is, but I just, looking at it from the outside, and then, then we find, history will prove or has proven that, there's been fraud, and there's, it's almost like it's turned whatever, draws people in, if it's, the sense of wanting to belong, and then maybe playing on an insecurity, and it just doesn't feel genuine. I mean, I think it's much more complex than that, but that's just as an outsider how I've always observed those big churches, and it's almost like, how can they be so big and other churches are struggling? Like that we see empty churches for sale, congregations dwindling, and how is it that we can have so much in some and then others that are literally just dying off?
That's a really good question, actually. What is it about, what do you think makes this is kind of not specifically Lutheran, but what makes the large church larger and the small church becomes smaller, or entertainment?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all production. Saunas and all those where they have everything staged, everything. People are wearing the same outfit, what they're preaching, I think, and then they follow it up with entertainment. Music.
Yeah, that's true.
Those short setup, whatever you would call mouse plays, and
Well,
it's a functionality.
Yeah.
No, like,
Open mouth, insert foot.
this is how they want to entertain.
yeah, okay, all right. No. But no, it's interesting, though, because one of the things that Lutheranism is known for is its music. But it's, quite different music.
But it's not set up on a stage like that.
That's right. That's right. So presentation maybe is more generic than us, because one of the things we talked about earlier was how easy it is for anybody to come here.
Those churches don't really,
Stand for anything?
well, don't stand for anything.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really don't think they do. I mean, I probably am projecting my prejudices, but I
We all
feel like
do.
they're not personal to people. It just is, you know, the repetition of these same phrases, and it's like,
Kind of like a liturgy. No, I'm not. I'm just saying it's very interesting sometimes how we use the same language to promote ourselves,
Yeah.
and we use the same language then to maybe denigrate somebody else. Jan? Righteous Gemstones, right, yeah.
A lot of fun, but I thought they made some very, very salient good points about what's extreme. I think some of those big churches, you know, big auditorium seating, big everything, it was bigger, shinier, noisier. And I think we're just kind of a quiet
Quiet bunch of worker bees.
Is it a bad comparison to say, okay, so let's put it this way, did anyone ever watch Sister Act? When she first walks in, how it was staged around cold board, and then it became a production, and everybody then sworn to that position. And find out, oh, she wasn't even a nun, she was an entertainer.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
we still get a little bit excited when Kevin plays something.
Oh, yeah.
Like he did on Sunday.
Yeah.
That opening act blew it out of the water.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was good though.
You know, we're still surprised by
Yeah. Nick?
It's refreshing too.
Nick?
I think one of the things that appeals to me about this church and the size of this church, and knowing that, you know, everybody enjoys what they enjoy, and I don't want to be judging here in church of others who may participate in a different type of. Anyway, I think what I like about this is ownership, and when you have I think to Dan's point, like there's an intimacy, there's a familiarity, but I think what it really boils down to is ownership, and it feels like in this church. You know, it functions, the volunteer activities and ministries, they wouldn't happen without you, in a way. And I feel like that sometimes what might actually seem somewhat appealing to be at a larger church where it feels like you can just show up and be sort of anonymous, and you actually are not necessarily contributing in the same way or expected, or you wouldn't have that opportunity to contribute in
Right.
the same way. So.
Right, right.
But that isn't necessarily Lutheran versus something else, because not all of it you would say, for instance, as big as it is you wouldn't want it.
Hmm.
But it's a function of
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I forgot what I was going to ask. Anybody have any questions? We can throw. Oh, I do. These slips of paper on your table. Those are for you to ask, to write questions on there. Put them in the basket, and then we'll give those to Pastor Andrea for next week. Right? Isn't that right, Christine? Yeah. Okay. Did I say that correctly? Okay.
unless everybody turns to the same question. Right.
Well, then we'll know something. Then we'll know something. So, I think I asked the question a while back. What do you think it means to be a Lutheran? What does it stand for? If somebody sat you down in a coffee shop and asked, "Why do you go to a Lutheran church?" And this goes a little bit back to the what your advertising name would be. But what's your 5-10 minute elevator speech about why I've chosen the faith that I've chosen? And maybe it's as simple as I was born into it, I've been raised in it, and I don't know anything else. That's
There's-
probably fair for you, Dan, right?
A little bit, but I think, you know, Felicia also earlier, I think, said, you know, it matters what's happening in the church, right? So
Yeah.
I think that would be probably a large emphasis about, you know, there's a lot of opportunities to participate and engage with the church, you know, internally, but yet externally too, right? So serving, you know, our children, obviously, it's important for them to have really open, positive experiences to learn about their spirituality, right? And where that may take them.
Yeah.
And so I don't know so much about Lutheranism other than the traditions that we are all talking about, which are, fantastic and that I'm familiar with. But I think more it's, those experiences that we have here in church and then outside of church.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll say something similar. It's a little bit of like the roots and wings. Like I appreciate the roots and the tradition here and that familiarity. And though not born into it, it's similar enough. And then Nick being Lutheran, but also just like the opportunity to explore. There's some fluidity. There is grace. Be doing new things and trying new things. There's an appetite for it. And again, I think a lot of these answers aren't specific to Lutheranism, but they're specific to maybe ELCA and then this church in particular.
Yeah, yeah. But it is interesting, that's a good point, and it is interesting that 50 years ago, you would have a conversation like this, and you would say, well, Lutheranism is different from Presbyterianism, is different from Methodism, is different from Episcopalian, today, I think that people have a hard time making those distinctions, don't you?
Because why?
Yeah, I don't know why.
No, but what's the point of it?
What's the point of the distinction?
Why would we put energy into distinguishing that?
Ah,
And I think I'll go back to we know the history, we know how we got here, but I feel like what's important is where are we going?
yeah, yeah. Less a question of what we believe in our doctrine. Again, this kind of idea of what's our style, how do we worship? Not necessarily what do we say when we worship.
It has to be both still, because to your point, although you could go anywhere and find that, so it still has to be some of this, again, the roots, but like where can your branches take you?
Yeah, yeah. We've got about just a few more minutes left. Does anybody have any more questions or comments? Or what does being a Lutheran mean to you? What does it not mean? No? Okay. Anything, any last thing that you wanted to say that you didn't really get a chance to talk about? Either this church or why I'm proud to be a Lutheran?
I think I would like to go somewhere else to experience the search for a church. We never really did that. I mean, we kind of did when we first moved in. Alyssa and I moved to South Minneapolis, right? And we're looking for churches. Because I think that was an interesting question that I haven't really experienced. My only experience was when I went to college and we went to the nearby church. I don't even remember what it was, but they had free dinner. So we had a free dinner.
Well, we've got it too.
Right, true. So, but I think that would be an interesting experience at some point, right? It's like, do you go to the one that's closest? Do you search out that Lutheran church? Does it matter? I think we would. I think we would search out the Lutheran church, but I really haven't experienced that. Really.
Don't search too much. I mean, now that you're here, this is kind of a retrospective question. Now that you're here, we don't want you searching anymore.
Dun, dun, dun.
Don't search anymore. This is as good as it gets, we hope. So, what's that? Don't search anymore, right. Your search is over. Quit searching. Stay here, please. We're desperate. We need you. No, we're not desperate. No, we aren't desperate. We are not desperate.
Well, I'll ask the moderator, what does Lutheranism mean to you?
What does Lutheranism mean to me? Boy.
Mic drop.
No. To me, I will go back to that. I go back to that phrase, the priesthood of all believers. That Luther really had a transformational sense, I think, of who human beings are, that people have worth of their own. And they do not necessarily have worth through groveling to a priest. They have worth in their own vocation. Luther was a huge proponent of the idea of vocation. And it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily work in the church as your vocation. What Luther was talking about was if you're a traffic cop, be the best darn traffic cop that you can be. I mean, that is your sense of duty to God. And that is how we live our lives, is through a sense of vocation and through a sense of what we do, the things that we do, That's really how we build a life. And I also like the sense of grace. You know, what's the first main thing that we do on a Sunday morning in a Sunday morning service? What's the first big inflection point in our service? Confession. Right. We have the corporate confession, but we have the confession and the forgiveness. And that's really a kind of a profound moment in the service. I mean, that is our moment of saying, this is who we are, and this is who God is, and we ask forgiveness, and we are given forgiveness. And that is, I think that's really important, that we know that we're forgiven, that we know that we live in God's grace, and that because of that, and this is Luther's explanation or response to the idea of cheap grace. The idea of cheap grace is that anybody can be, we're all saved, right? I mean, we're all under God's grace. That's so I don't have to do anything about it. And the great Lutheran heresy is that we aren't going to do anything about it because we're already saved and we're already under grace. Luther would answer that by saying that the joy, the gratitude that you feel for understanding that we are subjects of God's grace, that joy and that feeling is what motivates you to do work. That the work that you all have talked about this evening is a result of the joy and the gratitude and the feeling that we have here.
Yep.
And I think that those are important things about Lutheranism. That sense of great democratization, that sense of great everybody has a purpose in this church. And I think that's really important. So that would be my answer.
It's beautiful.
So, well, thank you all for being with us tonight, and thank you panelists for sitting up here and sharing about yourselves. And write your questions down, put them in the basket, and next week, Wednesday. No, Pastor Andrea will answer the questions next week. So, go to the wizard. The wizard will know. The wizard will know, right? So, thanks again.